Dear friends, I'm afraid I'm not being given the time to say farewell to you all as I would have wished by speaking to each of you personally.
The House meets this Saturday to respond to a situation of great gravity. We are here because for the first time for many years, British sovereign territory has been invaded by a foreign power.
Of course, none of us really even knew where the Falklands were at that stage. I mean, as a Scots regiment, people were asking whether it was off the coast of Scotland.
We were not properly organised for an assault.
There was no way of getting there except by flying via Argentina. The MOD had done a study before, in November 1981, where they concluded that retaking the Falkland Islands would be impossible. So if you dream that something is impossible, you don't waste time writing a plan to work out how you're going to do it. And then suddenly the box marked impossible was opened and we were handed the task.
I think it was probably the most extraordinary challenge imaginable, because you were looking on the map and think, it's 8,000 miles away.
And there were no roads, and there was no food available, so everything we had to take ourselves. You might get, if you have a sheep, but there was no vegetables other than what people grew entirely for themselves. Everything had to be taken.
We're just loading everything, as it became available, as the ships became available. We didn't know really what the upshot would be. Was it going to be an opposed amphibious landing?
So, okay, a ship gets sent to Bristol. Where's the nearest depot? Whatever, near depot. So load the stuff from that depot into that ship, even if it's not the ship you wanted to put it in. So you end up with horrific mixed loads of fuel in jerry cans and ammunition all in one ship. Horrific fire risk and so on.
We were flown to Gibraltar at the time. As we got there, we were told that we were going to requisition the Canberra to bring it back to England, Southampton, for the troops to board and it to be used as a troop ship. Now, the Canberra was on the final stages of the world cruise, and on their cruise board it didn't show that the ship was going to stop in the middle of the Mediterranean and allow all these gentlemen to climb up the side of the ship on the netting and go to the captain's office. And we sailed back to Southampton, and there were the troops waiting to get on board. I was with a friend of mine called John Carey. We sort of looked at each other. He looked at me, and I thought, well, this is it, John. We either travel for a week down there on this super cruise liner and then back and talk about it, but not realising that the destiny was we'd be there within 3 weeks fighting a war from this ship that we was on.
It was historically a very poor bomber. In theory, it would take about 12 Vulcans, because of their inaccuracy as opposed to the accuracy of their bombing, to put out a runway. The whole bombing system in a Vulcan was no better than the blanks and things like that. It was not accurate, and the chances of actually getting one where we actually planted it, which was almost exactly where we were aiming, was one in, I don't know, a hell of a lot. We really didn't expect to actually put a bomb on the runway.
He'd done the job, he dropped the bombs, and he was returning to his rear rendezvous with the bombing mission completed. At that point, I must admit, the crew just descended into whoops and hollers, and everybody was punching the air, and we were sort of patting ourselves on the back, if you like.
Well, the whole ship was having their evening meal, 6:30, 7 o'clock. And over the tannoy, the main tannoy, it came that, gentlemen, I'd like to inform everybody, or words to this effect, that the Argentinian cruiser, the Belgrano, has been sunk by one of our submarines. Oh, cheering, shouting, everything was happening. And then within minutes, all the guys suddenly realised what had happened. This is it. It's a real war. A few days after that, they paid us back, didn't they? They attacked the Sheffield.
And I do remember being up on the bridge. We couldn't believe it at first that Sheffield had been hit by the Exocet. And I remember up on the bridge wing that evening, seeing Sheffield in the distant horizon, smoking and leaning, but she was still afloat. And then, of course, abandoned ship order was given. And but they lost many. I mean, many died, 20 or so.
There was a lot of drooping chins and a lot of scared people on board the Lancelot. And I had to, I guess, in some instances, take the lead and say, this is what we're here for, guys. It is now a shooting match and we're on our way.
And it took on a different atmosphere, I think. And then we started to move south, and then we were told how we were going to deploy, that we would leave the Canberra by landing craft to go on to Fearless, and then from Fearless we would actually do a beach landing, World War II style.
The Sheffield didn't change our landing plans at all, no, but it made landing at San Carlos even more attractive, because it meant that we were quite safe from Exocet, because if you're in a bay like that, the Exocet's radar picks up the largest target. Well, the largest target's the land, so it rushes off and attacks a hill or a big rock or something and leaves you alone.
What we'd planned to do was to send an escort in to just double check there was nobody there, and we would then come in and lie off, lower the two LPDs, Imperious and Intrepid, get out the landing craft, get her up out of the water again so she's manoeuvrable, the ship, and then we would send those landing craft off to Canberra and other ships if they weren't already loaded, and so on, and we'd start the landing, and then they would go on in, and then the ships would follow in when we were certain there was no opposition in there and no mines. So the first people to do the mines testing were the escorts with the landing craft. The landing craft didn't find mines on the beaches, thankfully. The escorts didn't find mines in the water.
Our briefing was that our landing craft would leave at such and such a time, because they like to keep all the timings right. It would be dark. The weather wasn't too bad out there. He said, and then we'll be taken to Port St Carlos Beach, or our debussing point would be Port St Carlos. We got into the landing craft. The back gates, as I call them, they opened. Out go the landing craft. It was light, beautiful sunny day, and above us, jet aircraft flying around, zooming bombs down into the bay, shooting up some of the ships, shooting up some of the landing craft.
Once we got ashore, we realised we didn't have air superiority. These ships were very vulnerable, so we had to run all the stocks ashore into Ajax Bay. We realised that these ships were far too vulnerable and they had to get out, so we had to offload as quickly as we possibly could. But we're not able in night time to offload everything. We just couldn't do it.
We had intelligence from our special forces from mainland Argentina that were dug in that enemy aircraft had taken off. I stood there turning around talking to the captain, who was literally back to back with me. So we're just about to be attacked by 2 enemy Skyhawks. And I think that with not seconds literally within saying that, there was this loud thud and everything seemed to go to slow motion. And I realised then that I was pretty seriously injured. I didn't know how bad at the time, and crawled out to the starboard door. It was going over port side.
I thought, oh my God, this is awful. Because I was the helicopters that were going to, the heavy lift helicopters, Chinooks. One got off, Bravo November, which was wonderful and hugely useful. But my goodness, with the other helicopters, how much easier it would have been.
You've not got one at the stroke they gave you?
Tabbing in the regiment is moving from A to B at speed, or as best you can. It's something we are proud of in the regiment, where we can get around quite quickly. The Marines call it yomping. As I said, I've served with them. It's a little bit slower, but that's rivalry between us and them.
How the Marines in Paris did the marches they did is extraordinary, and much to their credit. The bottom line is that when a place is cold enough, it becomes dry because of ice and snow freezes the water. When it's not quite cold enough, you are just wet all the time. And that wetness is what absolutely destroys you, especially when you have the wind chill factors that you have down in the South Atlantic. So the operating conditions were horrendous.
That's when the guys were going down with the frostbite on their feet. I'm led to believe that it takes a few weeks for the toes to go black, but when we examined some of the soldiers, they'd gone black in a matter of days, so they had to be shipped out.
I was then summoned to the SATCOM, which had just been established in Ajax Bay by Admiral Fieldhouse, and said, what's the problem? So I said, well, we're trying to get onto Mount Kent. We're trying to get our chaps forward onto Mount Kent. And eventually he said, everyone's getting very impatient, go and take Goose Green. I said, you mean capture it? He said, yes. I understand he had this idea put into his head by someone else. And he was understandably quite worried about the fact they were losing a lot of ships and there wasn't any sort of visible progress being made. I assured him we weren't just hanging around doing nothing. So we now switch our attention to Goose Green, or a lot of our attention to Goose Green. And I send H. Jones and 2 Para down to Goose Green.
We started advancing on what was effectively the battalion centre line. Things seemed to stop. I remember it was raining really heavily, and we were trudging down the centre line, and the guys lay in the mud either side of me. I had no idea who they were, what the score was.
Lieutenant Colonel Jones, Captain Wood, Captain Dent, Lieutenant Barrett.
I was just listening to all the radio traffic. Colonel Jones was on the radio. He was clearly frustrated, to say mildly. He was shouting and screaming, you know, I want mortars, get me mortars, there are people dying up here. And I never heard him on the radio after that.
I under-resourced them. It was entirely my fault. H. Jones asked to have light armour, and I said, you can't have it. I don't want it bogged down on the way there. I should have taken another commando and gone myself and made a big operation out of it, in which case we would have got through much quicker. But all power to 2 Para's elbow. They won it with very little help from anybody else, and good on them, well done. And when Goose Green was over, we were then able to give our full attention to getting on to Mount Kent. And so we, with the surviving Chinook plus other helicopters, I flew one commando and a battery of guns up there over a period of 2 nights. And a good thing we'd sent D Squadron up there, because as the leading elements of 4-2 Commando started arriving, D Squadron were engaged in a firefight with Argentine Special Forces, who at last had moved up onto Mount Kent, and had they been up there on their own and uninterrupted by D Squadron, it would have been a massacre.
We had sent Sir Tristram in, loaded their ammunition and stuff for them, on the understanding that the landing craft would be there under orders to empty her and get her back the following night. What we didn't know is, because Sir Tristram was quite reasonably keeping radio silence, was that she was not unloaded. Galahad came, finding Tristram where he'd hoped to go and hide under this cliff. Well, not hide, but be protected by the cliff. So he anchored further out.
I jumped in a landing craft which was already half laden with ammunition, ready to go, on its way ashore. And I said, right, we're actually going to go via Galahad to find out what's happening. On the stern were 2 guards officers, and they said, we're trying to get to Bluff Cove. I said, well, you can go to Bluff Cove tonight. I'll take you to Bluff Cove tonight, but during the daylight, you've got to get off the ship. This ship and the other one are sitting ducks.
Somebody shouted, air raid warning red. And I looked up and I saw the silhouette of an aircraft overshoot the hold. Seconds later, there was a loud bang and it all went orange.
I was more angry then than I've ever been in my life, ever. And there's some pretty hideous sights. I mean, I'm not unused to it, but it was awful.
That first troop sitting across that 1,000 metres of open ground, I watched with my heart in my mouth. Eventually it disappeared from my sight. I was waiting to give the order to fire the anti-tank weapons above their head, but I soon got the message that they were there, in the bottom of the feature. My Marines were not going to lose a battle, a gutter fight in the rocks, halfway up a mountain, in the dark, in the snowstorm. This is what we do.
When L Company crossed the start line, the Argies were really alert and up for it, and they had, I think it was half a dozen casualties in the very first few minutes. Once it got settled down, it was just a question of pursuing the aim. I said, I believe that these conscripted, fairly simple Argentine soldiers will surrender if you let them. So let them. And that's what happened. They fought to begin with, and then when they realised that things were not going their way, they legged it, and we let them.
They got right to the base of the mountain when one of the corporal's section commanders stepped on a mine, and that alerted everybody on the mountain. It came over the air, RAP forward, urgent, casualties taken. The fighting that took place that night was by small groups of men. It wasn't controlled by the company commanders or anything, because it wasn't a company commander's war on this particular night. And B Company, unfortunately, took some heavy casualties that night. Ian Mackay, great guy, personal friend. We was in the same cabin all the way down to the Falklands. To save the lives of 2 or 3 of his companions, one was Ian Bailey, 2 of the soldiers I think had been killed, and Ian Bailey had been shot 3 times. He and his platoon commander, I am led to believe, was also shot. He just took the bulls by the horn and ran straight at the position that was firing at his small detachment, and just carried on. And as he got to the top or the lip of the trench or the gun line they were at, that he was killed. He was shot. And he saved a very precarious situation, and he deserved everything that he was awarded for. Yeah, good man. Good man.
I believe the plan was that we'd had our battle and therefore we wouldn't have another battle, and the Scots Guards were going to advance through us onto the hills surrounding Stanley, and they would have their battle there. But when they arrived, they'd arrived in atrocious weather conditions and they were in no fit state to do anything. So at that point, because we're going to be doing the final attack, all the assets of the force were given to us. By first light we were on the ridge, and we'd got a line of the machine guns on that ridge looking down into Stanley, and you know, we could see the Argentinians coming off, I think it was Mount Kent, one of those, in big clumps, and the machine guns were engaging them, and it seemed obvious that the whole thing was collapsing right in front of us.
There was Stanley, lit up. There was Stanley just down there. That was the target, and that was the aim. So to some degree, we seem to have achieved the very difficult role we were given to do successfully. So that was amazing. And of course, when you think like that, the inevitable is going to happen. And I felt a huge, huge blow to the back of my head, shoulders and body.
I was told that the Scots Guards had a hell of a fight. And I then went round to marry up with 2 Para and congratulate them on their highly successful Battle of Wireless Ridge. And I was standing looking at what I thought was going to be our objectives for the next night through my binoculars, when I heard the voice of a sergeant major saying, "Get off the effing skyline, you effers, the effing war isn't over yet." And I realised he was shouting at me, quite rightly, because I was standing about on his skyline, thereby inviting shell fire on him. So I flung myself down, started looking through my binoculars again, and then a pair of boots came up alongside me, and it was David Chandler, the CO of 2 Para, who said, "I think it may be over."
Gentlemen, I've just heard that the white flag is flying over Stanley. Hooray!